I'm interested in the etymology of mundane objects. Because they are so common, my hope is that when someone encounters my work, they might think about those everyday objects differently.
You're listening to Lives at Speak, a podcast highlighting the remarkable work of Sidwell Friends School alumni. I'm Brian Garman, head of school at Sidwell Friends, a pre-kindergarten through 12th grade independent Quaker school located in Washington, D.C. In this interview, I chat with Sonya Clark, class of 1985. Sonya is a renowned artist best known for her artful deconstruction and exploration of mundane objects and their social connotation. She was a recipient of the Anonymous Was a Woman Award in 2016, the co-winner of the Art Prize, juried Grand Prize in 2014, and the Smithsonian Artist Research Fellowship in 2010 and 2011. Additionally, Sonya was a Distinguished Research Fellow in the School of Arts at Virginia Commonwealth University, where she served as chair for the Craft Material Studies Department from 2006 until 2017. Currently, Sonya is a professor of art at Amherst College, her alma mater. In this episode, we discuss the power of Sonya's art, how curators put objects in conversation with one another, and one of Clark's favorite media, textiles. So welcome, friends. I'm Brian Garman, head of school at Sidwell Friends School, and it is a pleasure to be here with the visionary textile artist, Sonya Clark. Sonya, thanks so much for joining us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. My pleasure. Always happy to be in conversation with my alma mater.
Well, that's very kind of you. It's so nice to meet again. You and I met several years ago when you were on the faculty at Virginia Commonwealth, and now you're up at Amherst, which is your alma mater, right?
That's correct. Speaking of alma maters, right? So I was at Virginia Commonwealth University and chaired the Craft and Material Studies Department there for 12 years, and then came to Amherst just as a visiting professor while my husband and I were on sabbatical. And we actually met at Amherst, and it stuck. So
Yeah.
we're here now. We're here now. Yeah.
Well, you've had a homecoming of sorts with this incredible show at the National Museum of Women in the Arts. It's a mid-career retrospective with 100 objects, right?
100 objects. It's. Of course, I've made much more art than that, but who would think that 100 of them would be worthy of a retrospective? Yes. Yeah. No, I'm very excited. It's nice to have them all in one place. So many works in conversation with one another.
And what's that been like to have a show this large and to have it in your hometown?
Oh, one of the things that has been such a pleasure is that Katie Watt, who is a head chief curator at the National Museum of Women in the Arts, she really understands objects and understands what my work is trying to do. So from what I can see from afar, because I haven't seen the show in person yet, every image and from the catalog I've seen, she's just putting things in conversation that perhaps have not been in dialogue with one another. So a piece from 1994 might be in conversation with a piece from 2004, a piece from 2014. So to see that arc across time and have someone handle the work with such diligence and care and intelligent, what's the word I'm looking for? Sort of like, I would just say actually intelligent care, like really thinking about what the work is meaning. And then, of course, hometown of Washington, D.C. I mean, it's been a long time since I've lived in Washington, D.C., but of course, these are my formative years. My parents are both ancestors now, so I regret that neither of them had the opportunity to be with us to see this show. But they were both immigrated to the U.S. from the Caribbean, and I grew up in a house just off of 16th Street that we just sold shortly after my mother passed away. So I have deep roots in Washington, D.C. And of course, Sidwell was very formative to my time. I was not quite a lifer, but at Sidwell from 3rd grade through 12th grade. So almost a lifer.
I think we can count you in the honorary category. So.
Yeah, I'll take that.
You mentioned the relationship with the curator. Have you experienced something before, a kind of learning before, where the curator has put your, as you say, your objects into conversation with one another, that has led you to see the objects in new ways?
Yeah, that's actually, as an artist, what I hope for.
Mm.
So when I make an artwork, it's my hope that uh, I have a certain amount of intent around making that artwork. Perhaps it's asking a question, or it's an attempt at answering a question, and then it goes out into the world, and it has the opportunity to then engage with others. And so what good curators do is that they listen to the dialogue of the object, and they are in dialogue with the object, and then they start listening to the different voices of what each object is saying, and putting them in conversation with each other. So I would say that a good curator is like a good editor, like understands what the artist or the writer is trying to do, and sort of puts things in juxtaposition in a way that can help, a good editor and a good curator, that can help you see the work in new ways. And actually, it can be really generative.
Mm.
um,
Hmm.
I had a show many, many years ago. I think it was yes, I remember it was in 2006 in New York, and it was a group show. And a curator asked for a piece that I made in 1995, and then a piece that I made in 2005. And in my eye, I couldn't understand why these works would go together. And then when they were in the same space, it made me think about new works. I mean, it literally was generative, like this plus this
Hmm.
could equal a whole new body of work. So
Interesting.
I'm really grateful for curators. And I'm also really grateful for the audience, because when people ask questions, or are challenged by something, um, or don't get something, like all of those things are also generative.
Yeah, that's interesting. So let's go back to the Sidwell days for a moment, if we can. I mean,
Uh-huh. Let's see what
many
I can
questions.
remember, because I'm
Yeah.
old enough for a retrospective. Yeah.
You and I are the same age, so we'll
Mhm.
we'll go through this together. Um,
Right, right.
all right. So you came in third grade, and
Mhm.
what do you remember about Sidwell Friends? How did it shape the person that you are now? How did it shape your work?
I think that there's something about Quaker values that that just were instilled. This idea that everyone has something to offer. Everyone has a potential part of community, and if we're doing this well, we're recognizing each other's contributions, then it actually forms a kind of solidarity. And I
Mm.
think that is something that I hope for as I'm making work. It does mean that there's work to be done. Like piecework is not just about everybody getting along, but actually fighting for justice. And so I would say that those values were deeply instilled in me from an early age. And then the other thing that I would say is that there was I think the reason that my parents sent me to Sidwell, is my sister didn't go to Sidwell Friends, but I think the reason that my parents sent me to Sidwell is that it had the reputation at the time, and I think hopefully it still has this reputation of knowing how to work with students who are intellectually capable, but are also creative in lots of ways. And so, from
Mhm.
a very young age, my Montessori school teacher
Mm.
had told my mother that I was an artist, which I think people say that a lot about kids, but Mrs. Dennis was an artist herself. So she saw something in me. And many years later, I cycled back to that. And I think Sidwell nurtured some of that as well. So I'm very grateful for that.
Mhm. Were you
Without
involved?
Sidwell, I wouldn't have landed at Amherst College, which was really formative to how I think as an artist, though I didn't take a single studio class while I was here at Amherst.
Did you take any at Sidwell Friends?
Yes, yes. So I took some classes with Percy Martin,
Uh,
oh, this is going to be the hard part of we were required to take art in middle school, and forgive me, I'm forgetting the name of my middle school art teacher, um, but I do remember and this is going to make it worse because I remember my lower school art teacher's name. So Mrs. Gay, who was our lower school art teacher, I remember her had us like look and critique Van Goghs as little
Mm,
kids. I remember that well. Like we were looking at art and critically thinking about art at a really young age.
mm, mm. And talk about Percy a little bit. He was a very well-known artist in his own right, and just had a
Hmm.
wonderful show over at the museum at American University.
Oh, did he recently?
Yes, yeah, he's a wonderful printmaker, right?
Yeah, of course, yeah, yeah, yeah. I just not being in the area anymore.
Yeah.
I just didn't realize that he had had a show. Well, congrats to him, of course. I would say that one of the things that Percy did in our art classes, he sort of just allowed us space.
Hmm.
It was a space to be and think creatively. But I also remember like there were things that would kind of drive him crazy. Like he would say, your homework is to draw a street scene or something like that. And if you literally drew the road, like the blacktop of a road, and you didn't fill it in, like completely black, then he was like, "That's not what you saw." And we were just sort of
Hmm.
like sketched some dark lines and said, you fill in the rest. He was like, "No, no, no, no." Like, so even within that space of room for us to just be, there was a kind of diligence and criticality, which I think is, as an artist, you find your balance between those two things, like this space and the discipline.
Hmm. And so you said you went off to Amherst and you did not take a studio class there. You
Mm-mm.
developed this interest. You came back to this interest a bit later. And could you describe for us how that happened?
Yeah. So I think this is probably not too atypical of a lot of first generation American experiences. So my parents were both in the medical field. My father, the reason we grew up in Washington, D.C., is that let me just back up even further. So, my father and mother met in Jamaica.
Hmm.
My father was from Trinidad, my mother was from Jamaica. The reason they were both British colonies when they met, right? And so the reason that they met is that he was in the first class of people who were gathered up from the British Isles to be at the University of the West Indies. The main campus was in Jamaica. So thankfully that happened. He landed in Jamaica. He met my mother. They started a long distance affair because he transferred then from the West Indies to Howard University
Mm.
and worked his way through undergraduate school, graduate school, medical school,
Hmm.
and then was writing letters back and forth to my mother,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
Thin onion skin letters, like, there was no just picking up the phone. That wasn't really an option. I think when my mother then followed him here and joined him, bought a house and settled, you want your children to do well. And there's so many stereotypes about starving artists that even though my parents understood that I had these creative inclinations, they also knew I was good at math.
Hmm.
So they encouraged that. And even when I went to Amherst College, that was encouraged. And nowadays, I don't think I would have been allowed to be a psychology major. I think they would have made sure that I was a STEM major
Hmm.
of some sort. But I ended up majoring in psychology because I was following my father's footsteps because he was a psychiatrist. So he's an MD. But I was really interested in the way that the mind works. Um, and my parents' graduation present from Amherst to me was to I took one studio art class, but it wasn't at Amherst. It was at UMass, at the University of Massachusetts at
Hmm.
Amherst, because there's an exchange in the five colleges. So I
Okay.
took one class there, and that class was about African textiles, and I was actually kind of hooked. It was my senior year, and then my parents, as a graduation present from Amherst, um, paid for me to go to West Africa and study traditional art forms in West Africa for I think it was 4 or 5 weeks. And when I came back from that trip, I had a job lined up to work admissions at a boarding school just around the corner, actually, from Amherst. But when I came back from West Africa, the Cote d'Ivoire, I knew that I wanted to go to art school. Like, enough of doing everything for everybody else.
Mhm,
Like,
mhm.
I wanted to go to art school. So so I saved up my money from working at the boarding school, Williston, Northampton,
Okay, yeah, sure.
and I went to the art school, the Art Institute of Chicago.
Mhm.
And my father, being a very practical man, very generous but very practical, he said, "Okay, I just paid for Amherst College. So what is this? You're getting a second degree now in art, you know, and you're leaving a job to do this." And so I said, "Well, Dad, let's make an agreement. I'll do this. I'll pay for this." And he said, "Okay, if it's just a passing fancy, that's fine, and you need to get it out of your system." He said, "Even if it gets into your system, I just need you to promise me that you're going to get a master's degree, that you're not just going to go collecting bachelor's degrees for the rest of your life." And the first art class that I took at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago felt like I got oxygen in my
Oh,
lungs.
wow.
Like, it just felt like, oh my gosh, this is what I've been waiting for. There were no grades, by the way.
Uh-huh.
So all of that, being a good student and doing well on your SATs, all of that kind of stuff fell by the wayside. And I really realized that art was one of the hardest and most challenging things for me, but something that I needed to do
Mhm,
to understand the world around me.
mhm, mhm. I've only met you once, and I've seen you in some interviews. You have such an energy and positivity in your presence. How do you channel that into your work?
Oh, that's very nice of you to say. Um, Well, we kind of have some options, right? How we're going to be in the world, and so I. It's not that I don't have rage, because living in the United States of America, as a melanated woman, you know, and a cis woman, but still, you know, like, it is not an easy place to be
Right.
in this nation, and I maybe it's like that psychology degree. I have a
Huh.
kind of hope that that we can be better than the worst of us.
Oh,
In
wow.
fact, we are better than the worst of us, and also that um, human beings are complicated, um, and we can find our best selves, even in the complication that we are. And so there's something that I'm trying to do in the work, which is to um, call out subjugation and injustices while also celebrating humanity.
Hmm.
So to do both of those things, um, and and that is actually, Brian, I would say it's a mixture between being intentionally rageful and intentionally joyful.
Hmm. Oh, wow,
Right?
that's so interesting.
Like,
But yeah, are there psychologists that you studied as an undergraduate that resonate with you in terms of your thinking in those terms?
oh, probably, but if you ask me their names now, then I wouldn't be able to call them. But I would say that, you know, my father's example. My father, I always joke about this. How my mother really saw things in black and white. She would meet you and in 10 seconds decide whether she liked you or she didn't
Huh,
like you,
interesting.
right?
Yeah.
And people were always intimidated by my father because he was a psychiatrist. You can imagine, like, you're bringing home someone that you're dating, and they're just like, "Oh my gosh, your father's a psychiatrist." I was like, "You should not worry about my father. It's my mother who's going to decide in 10 seconds whether she likes you or not." So my mother really saw the world really clear cut, and it was like from her gut.
Hmm.
She was like, "I have a gut feeling about things." And my father walked with this really big heart. Like, he understood that people were complicated, and it's a good thing that he was a psychiatrist, because what that means is that he absorbed those complications to help us be our better selves, right?
Wow. Yeah.
So I'm their daughter, right?
Hmm.
So I have that. Like, my mother laughed. I have photographs of my mother that I swear you can hear her laugh through the photograph.
Oh,
Like,
wow.
she was just like
Yeah.
full of energy in that way. And my father was very, very even keeled. And I like to say that I have a balance between the two of them.
Yeah.
Like when when equilibrium is called for, that I can conjure the energy of my father. And when high energy is called for, that I can conjure the energy of my mother. And so I like to think in this way that even though that they're ancestors, that they live on through me.
I saw an interview with you in which you said that you wanted to make sure that you were living artfully.
Yeah.
Yeah, what does
Yeah.
what could help us understand what that means? I was really struck by that.
I mean that not just for myself, but for other people as well. And what I mean by, I don't think you have to be an artist to live artfully. Um, I think it has to do with well, I'll give you an example. Well, at least I have not gone but one other city since the pandemic, and so I live in the small town of Amherst, Massachusetts, and my husband and I are here. We are right. And almost daily, I take walks through the neighborhood, and it doesn't matter what the weather is, I'll still take a walk. And and so my challenge every day is to see this neighborhood that I walk in, and it's semi-rural, so there's a lot of nature around here, but to see it and feel it anew, right? And I would say that's a way of living artfully. Um, it's to sort of yes and what is around you. So um, yeah, there are birds chirping now, but are they the same birds as yesterday? And what conversations are they having with each other? And to let the imagination go in the direction of the attentiveness that we pay to our surroundings, and our surroundings not only being nature but also human beings, which can also mean to listen deeply and to listen behind the words that people are sharing with you, to listen to the looks that people give you,
Mm.
or to feel the people that are around you in ways that can help, for me, help me understand myself better. Like there's this way that James Baldwin has this great quote where he says that art is a kind of a confession. Um, and I'm going to massacre the quote, but he basically says that it's a way of understanding who you are and how you're connected to others, so that you can then understand more
Mm.
connections, right? And I think that's kind of what I mean when I say about living in the world artfully,
Hmm. Hmm.
is to figure out how we're connected.
Hmm. So you've described your parents as ancestors now, and I'm sorry
Hmm.
that sounds like you've lost your mother recently. I'm sorry for that. You're
Yeah. Well, 2 years. 2 years.
2 years,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And so this notion of um, ancestorship is really
Hmm.
animated in your work, right? You are deeply engaged with powerful symbols from the
Yeah.
past. Your work is so profoundly historically aware.
Thank you.
How what is the process you go through to choose these symbols, and how have you chosen to work with them over time? I mean, I'm thinking of two here in particular that are, hair. Thinking of hair, and I'm thinking about flags.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, in one sense, you could sum up my whole practice in hair and flags. You'd be leaving a couple things out, but
But we would
but
get a
but
lot.
that,
Not I'm also
yeah,
interested in the sugar as well, by the way. But it's but these are powerful symbols.
they are.
Yeah.
They are. So, you know that I was trained as a textile artist, and so I had the opportunity to study with really amazing textile artists, and like Nick Cave, not Nick Cave of Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, but
Right.
Nick Cave, the artist, right? And and when I was at the Art Institute of Chicago, and my draw to textiles has to do with the idea that I believe that textiles have the ability to speak.
Mm.
I mean that literally. Um, there are um, there are ways in which people learn how to weave textile structures while they're singing into the cloth. And so there's this, like you understand the pattern and how you're supposed to weave the cloth through a work song, right? So in that sense, is the song becomes a score. So again, a kind of text, right?
Mm-hmm.
But even as I say text, you hear its relationship to the word textile,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, in this language that we're speaking to each other, text and textile come from the Greek texere, which means to weave, right? So literally, like ancient Greeks were like, this is like text and cloth are the same thing, right? So it makes me think of this quotation when it comes to flags about the power of a textile, that a flag can be a piece of cloth that makes the guts of men grow bold. That's something that poet John Agard said. And it's true, it's just a piece of cloth. But then as soon as it becomes a symbol and imbued with whatever it's imbued with, whether that be nationalism or hate
Mm-hmm.
or patriotism or civil liberties, civil rights, um, the cloth has the ability to absorb all of that potency, that language. Um, and then the other thing is that we're walking around swaddled in cloth all day, every day. Like when I teach textiles, I often ask students to think of a time when they are not engaging cloth. And it's maybe like a moment in the shower, and then you grab your towel, or you step on the bath mat. Like it's like we're constantly touching cloth, which means that we have a visceral understanding, a haptic conversation, like a nonverbal relationship with the medium. So it strikes deep. And then with hair, um, I have so much to say about hair. I mean, it's like so much, right? That's why they're 100 words,
Right.
right? And more than that, right? But
Well, you've made hair wreaths, right?
I
And
mean,
sometimes there's an intersection between hair and the flag.
hmm so I work with hair, and sometimes I'm working with actual human hair,
Mm-hmm.
which is to say that I'm working with our DNA. And you mentioned the ancestors earlier. It is to say that I'm also working with the power of our ancestors, right? Each strand of hair, hair is the fiber that we grow, right? And so each strand of hair is also um, an ancestral strand.
Mm-hmm.
It's we think of ourselves as being individuals, but not a one of us is here without all the people who came before us, right? And all those people are codified in like a strand of hair that might get just washed down the sink, right? Like everybody is in that DNA, in that hair that holds all that DNA, right? And so it's powerful stuff, right? And so Brian, you and I grow different textures of hair,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
But if you plucked one of your hairs and one of my hairs, then and we looked at our DNA, then we as human beings,
Mm-hmm.
we're essentially the same,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right. Exactly.
Like we're essentially the same, and phenotypically we would be divided according to what the anthropologists did so many years ago, um, into different races, but genetically we're the same,
Right.
right?
Yep.
So hair also does this because of the constructions around race, right? That the kind of hair that I grow and the kind of hair that you grow separate us, right? But the hair itself, like the DNA in it, actually bring us together. So that's power. I mean, like I could do that all day, like something that can hold the complexity of us being one humanity,
Uh,
and also the complexity of us being divided
yeah.
along racial
Yeah.
categorizations. And that isn't the thing, actually. Racial categorizations, that's not the problem. The problem is then those racial categorizations go along the hierarchy, and that subjugation or supremacist notions
Yeah.
get put on to the racial categorizations, and there we have a problem. So all of that, I would say that I'm interested in the etymology of mundane objects. The more everyday that something is, like the hair we grow, that is, once it comes off our bodies, and most people are just like, that is trash, right? Like throw that away. Or the cloth that we surround ourselves with. Because they are so common, my hope is that when someone encounters my work, they might think about those everyday objects differently. And because they're so ubiquitous, then if I shift something in a $5 bill, then hopefully you don't see a $5 bill again anymore, though who uses cash nowadays? But you know what I mean? Or, now you think, wait, hair can be a medium? And it has been for, as long as human beings have been around, hair has been a medium for functional and aesthetic objects. Usually the hair of other mammals, but also human hair.
Yeah.
I could go on, but I'm sure you have other questions.
Well, it's so interesting. I mean, this notion of the etymology of mundane objects is fascinating.
Yeah, and the etymology of words themselves, how we name things and how we call things. I started with this connection between text and textiles, but they're also, I really think when I use text itself in my work, then I'm also thinking about it like being a cloth of a sort. And I actually think about how language can be as powerful as a monument. Like how I'll give you some examples of that. So there are a couple of pieces in the exhibit which play off of the word ciao, like ciao bella, like hello or goodbye,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
And Italian, right? And so and um and that's a pretty common phrase. Like it's a pretty common greeting. It's used in. I joke with my Italian friends that it's probably a bigger export out of what was once ancient Rome and now Italy, bigger than olive oil. Like everybody knows what ciao means.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It sounds cosmopolitan when you say ciao, right?
Right.
And the word, the etymology of the word, and really not like its deep roots. It literally means slave. So then you hold in your mind, like, wait, what? So when I'm saying like hello and goodbye to someone, then I'm saying I am your slave. This is what it means. And so the Italian word is schiavo, right? And the Venetian accent around schiavo turns it to ciao.
Huh. Interesting.
And of course, Venice was a major port of slavery. It wasn't colorized or melanated in ancient Rome, but it certainly was. Ancient Rome was built on was an empire built on subjugation and enslavement, and so is this empire, right?
Right.
So I think about language, like literally etymology, but then I think, well, how can I use that etymology and talk about how objects also have these legs, and what are we taking for granted, and what are we not taking for granted? And I think they're really obvious symbols that are in front of us, like the Confederate flag,
Right.
which are symbols of white supremacy, white nationalism, and the Confederates were insurrectionists from the start.
Yes.
That was the point.
That's right.
Right? They were trying to pull away from the Union, right?
Right.
And so when people take that and they conflate it with patriotism, it's just like, okay, what is going on here? And yet we know what's going on when we consider that this nation modeled itself after the Roman Empire, which meant that necessarily people had to be enslaved and treated as less than human in order for this nation, this empire, to build its wealth, right? Like it modeled itself after that. So to hold the Roman Empire as as this like, look at, like this is the really important to um, to Western civilization. We have to unpack that as well, and then say, oh, we swallowed that poison too,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
We swallowed that poison too. Yeah.
yeah. Well, it's so interesting because you're talking about etymology of words, etymology of art, the mundane. There there's is there a connection between deconstruction, uh,
Hmm.
in the terms of deconstruction as a literary theory and your artwork? I mean, because you're deconstructing this, you're deconstructing sacred symbols. Symbols, at least, are sacred to some, right? And this notion that these flags make the guts of men grow bold. I mean, there's something about that that resonates, and that you're deconstructing uh, the image to reveal its truth in some way. And then it's like, so for example, in the $5 bill, you're reconstructing it at the same time. So I mean, can you, maybe that's not what you're doing, but it seems to me that's an animate in your work in some manner. Can you talk about those projects?
Yeah, sure. So specifically, I think what you're referring to with the deconstruction of specifically the deconstruction of the Confederate or of a Confederate battle flag,
Right.
because that's the other thing. There were many Confederate flags,
Yes.
um, and in terms of hiding, there's people often refer to the Confederate flag that I use, which is the one that shorthand people refer to as a Confederate flag, and that's the one with the X through it, 13 stars, the
Right.
blue X through
Stars and bars that
13
some people would
stars.
call
Yeah.
it. But,
Well, actually, it's not the stars and
oh, it's
bars.
not. Oh, well, tell me
Yes,
what's the difference
people
here?
often say that it's the stars and bars. And the stars and bars is another Confederate flag. And often what people will do is that people will say, okay, we're going to take down the one with the X, right?
Right.
And they actually replace it with the stars and bars, which is a simple flag that has a red stripe, a white stripe, and a red stripe.
Huh.
And then the left corner has blue square and that then has 13 stars in the
I
round,
see.
and that is actually the stars and bars.
Interesting.
But like there's so many Confederate flags, but the one that we use and the one that we commonly think of as being the Confederate flag is the one that got popularized by the KKK,
Hmm.
right? And so like this notion of white terrorism, like it just went right with white terrorism, right? And so in the piece Unraveling, what I do is I invite people to stand next to me, pair with me. So it's just two of us at a time. And just with our hands, we pick apart a Confederate battle flag. And it's slow work. One of the things that happens is that people realize that they know cloth, but they don't actually understand how cloth is structured, right? um, and so to undo um, the damage of white supremacy, which rears its ugly head daily in this nation,
Hmm.
um, and in lots of other nations as well, is to understand its structure and to understand it at a granular level and to understand it at a grand level as well, and all the spaces in between. So sometimes when people are standing with me and working on that project, I have people who get really frustrated and they say, oh my gosh, this is taking forever. Can we just take down this flag and burn it or bury it? And they say, well, first of all, Bree Newsom took it down. So, you know, my friend John Sims burns them and buries them. So there are lots of artists who are doing this work, this symbolic work about what it means to dismantle um, notions of white supremacy. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think that really does tie to this idea of etymology. Like, what are the roots of things?
Hmm.
With sometimes when people are standing next to me as we are unraveling, they are triggered by all the hatred and violence that the Confederate battle flag um, signals.
Hmm.
And I was standing next to one young woman whose hands were shaking,
Hmm.
like, and understandably so, because um, this is a flag that preceded violence in her experience. Um, just always did, no holds barred about that. And I, to her, I just said, it's just a piece of cloth. To like, to dismantle its symbolism, to just say it's just a piece. You're going to help me just unravel just a piece of cloth. It's just a piece of cloth. It's nothing but a piece of cloth. And to other people, there'll be people who say, I've come here because people in my family are. I've had people tell me, people in their family belong to the KKK or the Proud Boys or whatever, and they say, I've come here to do this work because of people in my family, and I'll say, this is not the work. You actually have to go talk to your family. This is symbolic
Right.
work. So with each person, that psychology major is actually really helpful, right? Because I'm having to improvise in the moment. I never know what someone is going to say to me. And I never, I have to figure out what is the right response in the moment. But I learned so much from being with people. And then the additive property, like when you were talking about the $5 bill and putting an afro on Abraham Lincoln, which is admittedly funny, but humor that I like to unpack by saying, why is it funny for Abraham Lincoln to have an afro on him? In part, it's funny because I'm collapsing 1864 with 1964, right? Maybe it's also funny because Abraham Lincoln didn't grow that kind of hair, right? But then you think, well, lots of people, lots of African Americans don't grow the kind of hair that they don. In fact, in this nation, we have to pass laws to say that it's okay to grow the hair that we grow and wear it naturally. Like the Crown Act is literally saying, the way your hair grows from your head, it's okay for you to let that happen, as opposed to straightening it. Like that's what the Crown Act is saying. Like imagine if people who grow straight hair were told that they had to perm their hair to have it be afros, right? So right in there, you think, well, it's funny because there's already this hierarchy of white is right and anything else is not. So it's funny when Abraham Lincoln is wearing an afro, and it's not funny, not at all funny, when Beyonce, and I love Beyonce, so this is no disrespect, has her hair long and blonde. Nobody thinks, oh, that's hilarious what she's doing, right? And so the other thing that I like to say about this piece is that I've made 44 of those $5 bills with the afro on them, stitched on them, and not a one of them sold for $5. Not anywhere close. So the value, the value is the afro. So the point is that like this nation was built on that wealth, and that's not to deny that this nation was also stolen from our indigenous brothers and sisters. But it's to say like this wealth right here didn't happen without African American people. And others. Of course, I should also say Asian American people, because the hate that has been perpetrated against our Asian American brothers and sisters as well, raising its head. This nation has so much work to do, but I believe we can do it.
Well, that's your holding in both hands, the subjugation and the celebration of the humanity at the same time, right? That is what your art does, and I think it's why it's so resonant now, and so important now. Right? There's been a lot of the historical oppression and hate has been reoperationalized, strengthened perhaps in the last few years, and that deconstruction needs to continue.
Yeah, and I think when I think about what the hate that is perpetrated in this nation, that what the virulence of it is the fear of losing the privileges that come with the formation of whiteness, as opposed to realizing that like literally nobody's free until everybody's free. Like there's a way in which people are trapped by their own privilege.
Yeah.
And it's hard to see that because you just experience the privilege. And I walk with lots of privileges. I walk with some class privilege, educational privilege. And so I'm always trying to also unpack the privileges that I walk with and to see like how are my privileges um, actually undermining other people's freedoms.
Mhm.
What am I taking for granted
Mhm.
in my everyday as well? So not just this sort of finger pointing, but also saying, okay, all right. So if we're all in this together, then um, then how can I do the work of of turning the mirror on myself so that I can make sure that the unfreedoms that are deeply embedded in this nation, that I'm doing my part to turn those unfreedoms into freedoms. There's this great quote by Paul Robeson that says, "The artist must elect to fight for freedom or for slavery. I've made my choice because I had no alternative."
Yeah.
And that I just read that right off my wall because it's what I look at every day in my
Yeah,
studio.
that's an
And
amazing quote,
I'm
yeah.
like, okay, so how are you doing this today?
Yeah. There's a wonderful mural of Paul Robeson, down on V Street. Really amazing. I don't know if you've seen it, but, uh, next time you're in
Yeah, I
town.
haven't spent much time in DC, but
Yeah, well, we gotta go
yeah,
down we'll go down and
absolutely.
see we'll see the mural together. There's some wonderful murals down, in that section of town. It's really great. Really a very large mural, that celebrates the breadth of his legacy.
So I want to say that Paul Robeson, my one of my dearest friends, still was someone that I met at Sidwell, Leah Gilliam, and her mother wrote a book. Dorothy Butler Gilliam wrote a book on Paul Robeson, um, and of course, Miss Gilliam was for many years a columnist for the Washington Post. The first Black woman
Mm,
was a columnist for the Washington Post, and then Leah's father, Sam Gilliam, is this really famous artist who, when I was coming out of graduate school, I interviewed him, and I'm wondering, I'm not sure. I said, well, do you all still have that painting in the what would that building be
we
called?
do in the
Or
Art Center, that beautiful
yeah, the art
piece,
center.
and it's a huge piece, and actually, we have, an exhibit of Gilliam's paintings, still on display, and some of his textile work, right? Also.
Right. So this is the thing, one of the things that I loved about Mr. Gilliam's work is that he is a painter who has done many, many, many things. But among them, he got really well known for his draped
Right,
paintings, right? Which
exactly.
which he was
That's the
saying
textile
like,
work. I get draped painting is the the appropriate term.
yeah, yeah. But what he was doing as a painter is he was saying, okay, so if we take the cloth and free it from its stretcher bars, then it's cloth and it
Mhm.
has drape and it has this kind of freedom, right? Like just thinking about that. So when I was working as a textile, when I was getting my degree as a textile artist, I went to talk to him, to interview him, because he was like, the artist that I
Right.
knew,
Well,
kind of
the
the famous
Washington Color
artist that I
School,
knew.
right? He was
Yeah,
at
yeah,
really at the heart of that, the Washington
yeah.
Color School.
And the Gilliams have been in my life for a long time, so I was like, this, I'm just talking to like my dear friend's dad. He'll give me some time, right? And he said to me when I asked him about the drape paintings and their relationship to textile, he said, "Others look to a monument, and we look to a piece of cloth." And he said that to me in 1994, 1995, and it stayed with me for so long. And now I actually think about cloth as monuments. Like
Mhm.
to take that relationship, that binary relationship, and to collapse it and say like cloth is a monument,
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
And if cloth is a monument, then what are we doing with our monuments, and how are we letting cloth be a monument? So in one sense, a Confederate battle flag is a kind of monument. Like you can
Mhm.
take them all down and still anyone could draw one, right? So I've worked at like, how do I replace textile monuments with other textile monuments, right? Um, yeah. Yeah, so very grateful to that family. So I'm hoping the Amherst community, not the Amherst, sorry, the Sidwell. I'm hoping the Sidwell community who walks under Mr. Gilliam's painting on a regular basis will think about all that he has brought to the art world and also to me personally.
Yeah.
Very
Visionary.
grateful. Yeah.
Yeah. You've talked about, we've talked about the flag, we've talked about hair. There's a politics to hair,
Yeah.
right? You've mentioned the kind of hierarchy, and uh, I was struck by your representations of Madam C.J. Walker, and how did you think about
Mhm.
her and all of this?
Yeah, so actually, this is another kind of DC connection in a way. So a little circuitous, but I I had done this project, this collaborative project called the Beaded Prayers Project, which is actually currently up at the Crystal Bridges Museum in Arkansas.
Hmm.
This is the collaborative project that has been around now since 1998, and it's still going strong, in which I invite people to write down wishes, hopes, dreams, or prayers
Hmm.
and sew them shut in packets and attach at least one bead to the outside. Again, my interest in etymology, bead and prayer share the same etymology. Now that seems odd because they don't even sound alike, but it's from rosary beads,
Hmm. Yeah,
right?
no,
So
that makes
people were
sense.
literally
Right.
using beads as mnemonic devices to understand where they were with their prayer cycles. Now, I'm not a particularly religious person, but I thought this is fascinating, right? So I happened to be at the American Library Association with someone who asked if they could display part of that project as part of their contribution to the American Library Association conference. And so I was there for that purpose. We were in Atlanta. And one of the presentations was Vernon Jordan had just written a book that was published, and Alilia Bundles had just written a book that was published. And these two were on a panel together, these two authors. And the book that Alilia Bundles wrote was at the time called On Her Own Ground, and it was a book about Madame C.J.
Hmm.
Walker. And Madame C.J. Walker, for your audience, if you don't know, is was one of the first self-made women millionaires in this nation. She also was a Black woman,
Hmm.
so like what, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, right. So you'll hear first self-made Black woman millionaire, but she was one of the first self-made women millionaires, and she was born in 1867, a full 100 years before I was born, and she started working in the cotton fields of the South, and by the time she died in 1919, she had become this entrepreneur around the business of hair care,
Hmm.
and Lilia Bundles is her great granddaughter.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
I met Lilia, bought her books. Thought, oh yeah, Madam C.J. Walker, right? Of course, knew who she was, but hadn't read a whole book about her. Lilia signed that book, and we've become friends ever since. And so I made works around Madam C.J. Walker because I was struck by how she was able to negotiate a capitalist system in which women didn't even have the right to vote, certainly then, and then Black women didn't have the right to, Black people in general didn't have the right to vote until the 60s. So, here is a woman who managed to build her own wealth, and because she was wealthy, it gave her in a capitalist country, it gave her access to a white man's world,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
It gave her a kind of power that she could work on anti-lynching campaigns. It also meant people weren't looking; they were looking at churches. They were racist folks were looking at preachers, Black preachers, and churches, and saying, "Okay, that's where the opposition to white nationalism is happening." But it was also happening at Black women's salons,
Hmm.
right? So there's lots of activism happening there, but they weren't looking for it.
Right.
So she was an activist of sorts, of course, but she also gets criticized because she popularized the use of hair straightening tools. And so some people love her and some people hate her, and those complications I find quite interesting. I'm on the side of not hating her because I sort of am like, all the good that she did.
Right.
it's okay if everyone wasn't donning an afro then. I mean, if we are still working on Crown Act rights now in 2021, then I'm not really mad at Madam C.J. Walker for thinking, okay, we might have to do our hair a little bit more like these people who are trying to subjugate us for us to be taken seriously. And I know that's complicated, but if we're still working on this now, then someone who's born just a few years after the end of the Emancipation Proclamation, I'm like, I can give you this one. It's complicated,
Right.
but I can give it to you.
Well,
yeah, so I've made a number of pieces around her.
yeah, this speaks to your penchant to find complexity. Right, we are all complicated human beings, and your art brings a humanity to us in a very, I think, very important way, a very subtle way, and I appreciate that. I had so many pieces that I admire, and I just wanted to name. I thought maybe I'd just go through and name a few. This is kind of for me.
Oh, sure. Yeah. yeah, the interview's
Right.
over. This part is just for Brian and me.
But pieces that I was really drawn to. I mean, all of it. I mean, the flag pieces I found very powerful, right? And especially those that brought the hair and the flags together. I found that to be very, very powerful. Well, how about Crossroads?
Oh, Crossroads is is that a comb piece?
No, it's literally the crossroads, right? It has a pyramid in the middle, and then the roads going over the pyramid.
Oh, wow, that piece is in the show. Okay, right. Remember, I haven't seen the show yet.
Yeah.
So Crossroads is it is both a headdress and it has these arrows. It's red, black, and
Right,
white.
exactly. That's the one.
Yes.
Yep, we're on the same one.
It's 100 pieces.
Yeah.
So Crossroads is a piece that for many years I was thinking about how in Yoruba culture, among the Yoruba people in West Africa.
Right.
So now there's a whole Yoruba diaspora. Yoruba people are everywhere, and when I say everywhere, I grew up across the street in Washington D.C. The ambassador from Benin and his family, who were Yoruba, Ambassador Ajibade and his family of 14, they were Yoruba. So Benin, which was then called Dahomey, Nigeria, huge diaspora of Yoruba people. Many Yoruba people who were brought to the Western Hemisphere during what is called the transatlantic slave trade route. So that global movement of people. They have this belief that your head is the seat of your soul, not your heart, not your elbow, not your knee, but your head, right? And so for many years, I was making pieces that were sort of honoring our souls by making headdresses that honored our heads. And this really borrowing from that Yoruba tradition. So we started with that. And that piece actually has on it, if you look at it, Brian, it has a number of these packets on it too, like these beaded purse packets. So it is, each one of those packets has an arrow on it, like this multi-directional, like which way are you going?
Yeah.
What does it mean to be at the crossroads? The crossroads being the site of like change and power.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's where there was a god like figure Eshu, right, who would meet people
yes.
there, right? Yeah.
Stuff. Okay. Yeah. So Eshu is known for being the god or the Orisha of the crossroads, right? So and he's a complicated figure. He's a trickster.
Yeah.
And he is also sometimes a she, right? Like it's hard to place Eshu, right? And Eshu can is a messenger as well, and so Eshu can mess up your communication with the other Orisha. It's like truly a trickster in all the ways that tricksters have power and help us understand the complications of the universe, really.
Yeah.
Right. So this piece is made in honor of Eshu.
Oh wow.
Right?
Yeah, I wondered that, and there's also, of course, this is part of blues lore too, right? With the
yes,
Johnson legend.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, that's the same. That's
Same.
drawing from exactly
Yeah.
that same well.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
How about blued?
Oh, so blued. So these are really old pieces. These are from early on. So blued is, I think it's dated maybe 1997 or 1998. And blued is also this relationship of bringing two souls together.
Uh, yeah.
And that piece, I started making it around the same time that my husband and I, my now husband of 25 years, and I decided to get married.
Uh,
So uh, there are these beautiful headrests
yeah.
that you find throughout the continent of Africa that sometimes they look like small stools, but they're actually like pillows. They're like sculptures to hold your head while you're sleeping.
Huh.
Right? And sometimes the married ones will have a chain between them, like this idea of linking between them. And so I made this for my husband and I, and it's we joke about it. So it's the one piece in the collection that is his, right? Like it's his. I gave it to him, so he had to sign the loan
Uh,
paperwork to release it to the show. And we joke about how we're each other's ball and chain, yuckity yuck, but also how we're unified. We've been at this for a while, and I'm deeply grateful that we committed to each other for a lifetime.
mm.
It's one of the things I did well in my 20s is making that decision. I have a lot. There's a much longer list on the other side, and then he named the piece "Blued" not only to to refer to the blues tradition, which talks a lot about love
Sure.
and a lot about the challenges of love, but also to play off of the word glued.
Yes, I see it
So
now.
glued,
I like
yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah,
That's very
yeah.
sweet. That's a beautiful story. And then just I wanted to talk about one sugar art piece, which is the
Uh-huh.
price.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so that piece relates to, so as I said at the beginning, my parents are both from the Caribbean, and so and from what used to be Britain, during colonization, and in um, certainly in their lifetimes, and I'm trying to think of the actual dates of when both of those nations, I should know this, became independent of Britain. One could argue whether they really still are, but it was a sugar cane that was the cash crop that brought my African ancestors to the Caribbean, and like a lot of people of African descent, I have a multiracial background. If you came to a family reunion in Jamaica, everybody's there.
Yeah,
Everybody's there.
yeah.
But I identify as a black person, and would be identified as a black person, and by most people, and so I wanted to think about this idea. There are a couple pieces in the show that bring together this idea of what it really means to really challenge this notion of what it means to think about a human being, a human individual, as a commodity.
Mhm,
Like, what does that actually mean?
mhm.
And so I worked with my studio assistants to do some research. Um, and we we found this paper that had been written that it was like devastating work, right? That you could plug in different attributes. So I plugged in different attributes about myself, my age, my skills, um, all of that at the time that the price was made, to understand what my value would have
Mhm.
been in today's dollars.
Mm.
And it's like a nice car, not the world's most expensive car.
Mhm.
It's a nice car. And so the piece is made out of paper that is shaped around the size of bills, like dollar bills or currency. And that paper is made from what is called bagasse. And bagasse is what is left over when you squeeze out all the sugar cane. So
Mm.
you've taken the stuff that you want for your sweet tooth, right? Thinking about how European gentry would show off their rotten teeth as this sign of um, luxury. You're like, I'm so wealthy, I can have rotten teeth. Such an odd thing, anyway. But to take these bills, this paper that is made from the leftover. So, like, once you've squeezed out all of the sugar juice, right, and turn that into rum or molasses or sugar, table sugar. What is left is the grass, right?
Mm-hmm.
The grass itself, right? The cane itself. And normally that would just get burned, but it can be turned into paper pulp and paper. It also can be turned into, there's some enterprising Brazilians who have turned it into thread, a kind of fiber
Mm-hmm.
that I've
Mm-hmm.
used for other pieces. But for the price, I turned this bagasse paper into currency. And it's just this brown currency. It's about the same color as my skin. Um, and it's wrapped with a band that reads 36,683, which is what I would have been worth if someone were to buy me, if slavery still existed in 2016. Now, I have to tell you, I'm worth a hell of a lot more than that. Right? But it just makes you think, like, you could buy a person, not employ a person, own a person for $36,000.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to make that very real. And so that's actually the price of the piece.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, just some paper made from some leftover sugar cane. This is how much this piece is worth. But yeah,
it's powerful.
Yeah.
When
Thank you for asking about those pieces. Yeah.
No, thank you for sharing. And I should just mention that all of these photographs of all of these pieces are available on your website, right? SonyaClark.com.
Yeah, most of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
I think everything we talked about.
these
Sure.
are,
Yeah.
these are, yeah.
Yeah.
Because I've been looking at it, and the price also reminded me, and you mentioned him earlier, Baldwin, right? Baldwin had this phrase, "the price of the ticket," right? And
Yeah.
Jasmine Wahi, who's one of our former students and alumna,
Yes.
who did a great piece on you actually in the Times, right? Really nice piece.
I was so honored to have it as Sidwell alum write it, but she's brilliant.
Yeah,
too.
she's wonderful. Hello, Jasmine, how are you?
Yeah. And like,
we have to get one of these too.
Fearless. Yes, you absolutely must. A fearless activist.
Yes.
And just, I'm so proud to know her.
Yeah,
so proud to know her. Yeah.
Terrific. So let me then ask, as we draw to a close here, what does solidarity mean to you?
So I think about solidarity as a sort of the lifeblood that holds communities together. And so there might be a moment when, like, if you think about your own body as an organism, your foot falls asleep, so something is not right there. You have to get blood to that part of your foot, right? And so I think about solidarity as being something that is in flux, but towards the goal of making sure that all of us are cared for. Because if we're not all cared for, then really none of us are cared for. So it's really like, I think about solidarity as this ecosystem. Like, how is it possible for, if I see, it means that all sorts of systems are working in my body. And if I can't see, something is not working, right? So if we're blinded by not seeing, if we're blinded, then it means something is not working, right? And so solidarity requires all the parts to be in constant interaction with one another, and to call out, like, the foot is asleep right now, or the eye cannot see right now. We have to fix that. So of course I'm answering you with a metaphor, but that's the best I can do as an artist.
It's a beautiful way to end. And thank you so much for raising the questions of justice, and for pointing us in the direction of solidarity, and for the tremendous contribution that you've made to the art world. we're very grateful that you were able to spend time with us today, Sonya. Sonya Clark, thank you for being with us.
Oh, Brian, my pleasure, my deep, deep pleasure. And I hope we get to talk again soon.
Yeah, it was fun.